I'm Skúli Arason. I'll be with you to show you some of the most important or most interesting sites of Reykjavík, something that you could do probably in one day without any trouble. We're standing in front of Tjörnin, which we call it in Icelandic. It basically means the pond, and the pond is kind of like the heart of the old Reykjavík. Around the pond we have the west side, as we call it, Vesturbærin, and also of course the city center itself. And in the pond there's the building, the municipality of Reykjavík. People were not so happy when they wanted to build that back in 1987, because the building itself is in the pond, and in Iceland that was a very radical thing to do. Very unpopular at the time, but I think people have come around to it. It's a very nice building to visit, and I think one of the most interesting things to do there is that inside the city hall itself there's a huge map of Iceland. It's probably about 5 meters big, and it's elevated, so it's a 3D rendering of the country itself. It's a very good idea to get to see that map and get a sense of what Iceland is all about. If you look at that map, for example, it's very easy to see how Iceland in general is a volcanic island, because you can see the way it crisscrosses the country from the southwest to the northeast. All the big volcanoes of Iceland which goes in that direction. So we recommend that highly. And also next to the pond we have Fríkirkjan, which is an excellent cozy church to visit. Next to Fríkirkja we have the National Museum of Art. The National Museum of Art holds many of Iceland's most famous paintings. Scattered around Reykjavík there are of course many art pieces, and one of my favorite artists is Einar Jónsson. He made this statue right here of the dragon, one of many statues of his that you could expect to see when walking around in Reykjavík, and also expect to see in the garden of Einar Jónsson next to Hallgrímskirkja. Right now we're at the Harpa in Reykjavík. Let's look at the history of Reykjavík. Reykjavík is as old as the populated settlement in Iceland itself, because our earliest settler, Ingólfur Arnarhóll, he came here sailing on his Viking boat from Norway, just as most of the people who came to Iceland did. When they did so, there was a tradition of Vikings, or settlers at least, to having chance decide a part of where they would land or where they would make their first settlements. So Ingólfur Arnarhóll had on his Viking boat 2 high-seat pillars. They call it Öndvegissúlur in Icelandic. There were 2 large pillars on the boat itself, and to decide where it would be good to start the settlement of this new country that he just discovered, Iceland. He saw the country on the horizon when he arrived, and they decided to drop the 2 head seat pillars into the ocean. And then when they would find the pillars themselves, that would be the places where they had settlement. So one pillar was in South Iceland and the other one was here in Reykjavík, supposedly. Some people say that it was just basically a great place to settle because he saw smoke arising from an area in the center of Reykjavík, which meant that they had some assistance in keeping warm during the winter, which of course are quite long in Iceland. And the name Reykjavík translates directly to Smoky Bay. So smoke coming into the bay was the reason why the capital was given this name. But so basically there has been settlement here in Reykjavík since the year 874 AD, and it was actually very, very small until the 18th century. It was basically just a farmland in Reykjavík, and after the 18th century the settlement got, well, tighter, bigger, and being a country with both a relatively long history since 874 until the present day. The building of the country has been in leaps and bounds. So, for example, it was a farmland in Reykjavík up until the 18th and 19th century, and we haven't really built that much until after the Second World War. So after the Second World War, after everything that's happened in the Icelandic history, that is the time when basically most of the town got built up quite rapidly. There had been buildings, and to a smaller extent the old town, which was mostly built around the year 1900. But after 1950, for example, with the Marshall Aid, which many of the European countries received after the Second World War, Iceland got the chance to build its fishing fleet. And the fishing fleet has held side by side with the gradual modernization of the country. So Iceland got very modern after the Second World War. We had great opportunities with fishing, and we built our little, very humble empire on fishing itself. So we're at the hub of the productivity of Iceland right now. This is where we get our income, and of course we're quite proud of our fisheries. Let's go downtown for a look. Yeah, speaking about Ingólfur Arnarhóll, the founder of Reykjavík, he's standing here on this hill just next to us. We're at Arnarhóll, which is a hill in the center of Reykjavík, which is a gathering point for many occasions here. We have a cultural night every August where we hold great concerts here, and every time we do something really big and important, like for example when Iceland did really well at the soccer European Cup, this hill got filled up with the Icelandic population, probably about 50,000-60,000 people here, all doing the famous Viking clap, which is often called the thunderclap. But also next to us is the National Theatre. The National Theatre of Iceland is a building, it takes inspiration from the Icelandic nature, just like many buildings that the famous architect Samuel Guðjónsson made. He made, for example, the University of Iceland building, the National Theatre building, and of course the most famous one, Hallgrímskirkja. Also next to here we have the most famous building in recent times, which is Harpa. Harpa, which means basically a harp. Harpa is built next to the ocean in the center of Reykjavík, and one of the designers is Ólafur Elíasson. He's a very famous visual artist. He works in many mediums, but one of the most interesting points about Harpa is that the building itself resembles basalt columns. So the columns of Harpa in the glass resembles the basalt columns that we know from places such as Svartifoss up in the Skaftafell National Park, and of course the new canyon which is quite famous called Stuðlagil. And it's built in a very special way, so when you walk around the building itself and see the building, that the glass changes colors depending on where you stand in relation to it. And also it's quite flexible because it has to take a lot of Icelandic wind, which is next to the harbor. There's a lot of wind, and so the glass has to be a little bit flexible to hold the wind itself. It was a great architectural feat, and they have tours there every day, and you could visit there and get the guided tour to know everything about the building. We recommend taking a tour there when you're here if you have the time. Right now we are smack in the center of Reykjavík. It couldn't be any more center than this. Actually, there's a plaque nearby here which marks the center of Reykjavík. Around this area everything got built, sprawling out from here. So I'm standing right now at Austurvöllur, it's called. It's a small park called Austurvöllur. People are having a nice time in the sunshine here in the summer night, because it's sun, and when it's sun here in Iceland we tend to go out as much as we can. Behind me is the parliament. This is the parliament, which was built in 1881, so it's definitely one of the older buildings in Iceland, and this is where everything gets decided, but it's also the place where we like to protest. This site is actually famous for being the center of the protest following the collapse, the famous banking collapse of 2007-2008. And people were banging their pots and pans around here where I'm standing right now, going quite crazy during the bank collapse, which was quite heavy in Iceland, as you maybe know. There's actually a monument remembering the civil disobedience that took place here at that time. And behind me is the church where every major parliament gets started. The president of Iceland comes down here with all the with the Icelandic bishop and all the members of parliament, and they ceremoniously start each year by marching from this church to the parliament building. Not too long, not too complicated, but it's interesting to know that we're a small country, and that's why we have such a small parliament building, right? It's very cozy. Around here there are many cafes and restaurants which we can only recommend that you take the time to get to know. Excellent restaurants in an excellent environment, winter or summer, everything's quite nice here. So this is Austurvöllur, and from here it's easy walking distance to the shopping streets around here. There are very many souvenir shops here around here also, and the old harbor is about 200 yards away, something like that. And as you can maybe see, I'm wearing this very nice woolen sweater. This is one actually that my mother made for me, like many mothers do in Iceland. But you can find similar woolen sweaters in every souvenir shop, of which there are quite many here in downtown Reykjavík. You can always look for a puffin in the window. We like to call them puffin shops in Iceland, because they have many puffins for sale there. And we all love the puffins. So here we are still in the center of Reykjavík. Now we're at one of the main walking streets. Basically we have, if we look up behind me, this is called Laugavegurinn, which is the main shopping street in Iceland. And it leads from downtown next to the parliament building all the way about 2 or 3 kilometers. Much of it is a walking street at the moment, and in the summertime it's usually a walking street, and around it you have very many cafes, restaurants, souvenir shops, and most of the things that you would like to see. There are many designer shops here also. There are many artisans, Icelandic, doing all kinds of interesting souvenirs and products that are fun to visit to. Often you have workshops that are open for where you can see people make their art or make their products themselves. And there are very many interesting places to see, and basically just do the standard people watching around here. So nothing's nicer than sitting down, having a cup of coffee, checking out the culture around you, because even though we have many historical sites or many natural sites, sometimes it's just interesting to look at the people where you are at any given moment. So here we are in the hustle bustle of central Reykjavík, and behind me is Hallgrímskirkja. Hallgrímskirkja is the major landmark in Reykjavík, and it's visible from almost every point of the greater Reykjavík area. In the greater Reykjavík area we have about, I would say, 60-70% of the population, which means, well, of the 360,000 inhabitants in Iceland, around 70% of them live in the greater Reykjavík area. So that's about 220,000, 230,000, something like that. We are behind the church. This is the backside, we could call it, but also a very nice view because the church itself looks great from every angle. It's quite big. The story of the church is Reykjavík wanted to have a grand main church of the country, so to speak, and in 1937 the greatest or most known architect of Iceland, Guðjón Samúelsson, he designed the building in 1937, and they started construction after the Second World War, and it took 40 years to finalize, and in 1986 it was ready. The church tower itself is 74 meters high, which is about 240 feet. You can take an elevator upstairs and see great views of Reykjavík and even the areas around Reykjavík, because it's the highest point here and the highest point in Reykjavík possible. So there's a great viewing area inside the church, and for a small fee you can of course visit the church for free, but with a small fee you can take the elevator upstairs for the viewing. Guðjón Samúelsson used to use features from Icelandic nature a lot, so the features that are prominent on front of the church, on the tower itself, on the wings that come down from it, is the classic Icelandic basalt column rock formation feature, which we all know from places such as Reynisfjara in South Iceland, the famous black sand beach, and also from Svartifoss in Skaftafell. In front of the church there's the very prominent statue of a Viking, which that is Leifur Eiríksson. Leifur Eiríksson, he was the son of Eric the Red. Eric the Red, he was from West Iceland, or even Norway we could call it, because back in those days most Vikings that came here were only about a few generations from Norway mostly, because this is before the year 1000 AD. Eric the Red, Leifur Eiríksson's father, he discovered Greenland, or went to Greenland at least from Iceland. Greenland goes further in every direction than Iceland, so it was probably easy for him to find, but he started a settlement in south of Greenland, and from there his son Leifur Eiríksson, he went further with his Viking ships, and in around the year 1000 he discovered America. He went there 400 years before Christopher Columbus, and they basically went to what we know as Newfoundland, or an Icelandic Nýfundna land. At the time when he went there it was very heavily vegetated, and there was a lot of wines there, so he called it Vinland in Icelandic, or wine country. But they weren't able to stay there. There's still there's some geological findings in Newfoundland that support this. They have found some Viking remains of Viking settlements that have been there. But according to the stories that they made from these adventures, they had some serious problem with the natives, and the natives drew Leifur Eiríksson and his family out, even though it was a very abundant country for them, and so they didn't manage to get a foothold in the States or in North America. That came later. The statue in front of Hallgrímskirkja was a gift from the American government to celebrate the 1000-year settlement in Iceland in the year 1930. So 1930, the American government gave Reykjavík and Iceland this statue. Inside Hallgrímskirkja there's a huge organ, a very nice organ that has some great acoustics, and if you're lucky enough to be here when it's being used, enjoy. And down from Hallgrímskirkja you have this very cozy street, Skólavörðustígur. Skólavörðustígur is filled with cafes and shops that are interesting to browse in. And just opposite the church we have, well, one of my favorite hidden gems in Reykjavík, which is the garden of Einar Jónsson. Einar Jónsson, he's an excellent sculpture maker, and this garden is open at all hours, and I recommend going there and seeing his quite gothic and adventurous sculptures. Let's check it out also. Let's go there. So now we're in the garden of Einar Jónsson. Einar Jónsson was a prominent sculpturist, mostly. He died in 1954, and just after the turn of the century, around 1900, he was very active. For example, this statue is made in the years between 1904 to 1908, and he has a very adventurous Nordic feel to his works. Many of his works are myths that he's working with out from the Icelandic sagas, or the Nordic sagas we can call them, about Thor and all the other gods and their stories. So many of them are derived from them, and he's also interpreting feelings and everything with very interesting, adventurous and cool pieces. So I recommend this place a lot. This is open all year round, and the garden is free, even though the museum itself has an entrance as just like every other museum in Reykjavík. There are many museums to visit, and this is a very convenient one to visit because it's just next to Hallgrímskirkja. So definitely when you're at Hallgrímskirkja, which probably most people would like to do, I recommend just going over the street here and checking this garden out. Maybe grab a coffee in a nearby cafe and take it easy here in the garden. It's very nice. So this has been downtown Reykjavík. We'll take a small detour right now outside the main center up to Perlan. Yeah, so here we are at Perlan, the Pearl. This is a building that the former mayor of Reykjavík, Davíð Oddsson, he was also a prime minister here. He was very keen on making a new monument for Reykjavík. And there are these 6 water tanks standing on this hill called Öskjuhlíð, where we're standing right now. And so they basically just made this very nice dome up there. And up there you have viewing platforms where you can see everything. You can see all the areas of Reykjavík quite clearly, and also the neighboring areas, as well as the mountains that surround the place. It's an excellent visit just to go there for the views, but they also have a very nice exhibition in there, The Wonders of Iceland, which covers everything about the Icelandic nature, bird life, the volcanic history, etc. And also in there's a beautiful exhibition about the Northern Lights. In one of the tanks there is an excellent dome-shaped movie theater where you can see a 360 panorama of Icelandic Northern Lights, which is a must, especially since it's often hard to find them outside when you're here. Being in Iceland in the winter time, it's of course quite likely, but many people cannot visit during the winter time. So to make sure that you see the Northern Lights, a visit to the planetarium in Perlan is a good idea. There's a cafe on the top floor here in the dome itself. Inside the dome there's a revolving floor, which means if you're sitting down for a cup of coffee, it takes you about 1 hour to do the whole circle, which means that you see everything of Reykjavík without even leaving your seat, so to speak. This is a beautiful area just for jogging or doing a nice evening walk. There are rapids here everywhere. One of the few animals you expect to see in Iceland, because we don't have that many wild animals in Iceland. We can call these rapids wild because they're here out in the nature fending for themselves. And you can also learn everything about the Icelandic animals in there. There's a replica of Látrabjarg, which is one of the biggest ocean bird areas in Europe, actually, which is found in the Westfjords, but it's also inside the Perla area. So there are many things to see and do here, and I think to learn more about Iceland in general and everything that the nature in Iceland has to offer, Perlan is a great place to visit. I would like to thank you for taking this little tour of some of the areas and some of the places that are nice to see in Reykjavík. I hope you can all have the opportunity to visit and do some of these things, and also many others that we didn't have time to cover right now. But I hope this gives some idea of the atmosphere and what to experience in Reykjavík. It's something that you all have to try for yourselves. Thank you all very much, and from Reykjavík we say goodbye or bless. blesses goodbye in Icelandic. Bless, bless.